Hi, I'm Hamish Ford. Welcome back to FMCS 1000 and week 9. The topic for this week is a very large one that we're calling platforms. Okay, so in the first video, I'm going to define and address the changing nature of contemporary media and culture as it proliferates across multiple platforms in what we call the convergence era, which transforms how media texts are produced, distributed, and consumed within what is now a genuinely global and in many ways borderless image world and culture world enabled by digital technology. This results in an increasingly multi-screen culture. So in the second video, I'll explore the importance of multiple portable screens to the platform and convergence era, breaking down distinctions between media forms as everything becomes increasingly delivered via online and mobile platforms. With phones, tablets, and laptop devices, our individual centres of both production and consumption, they are the proliferating, increasingly central sites of platform and convergence media culture. So for theoretical discussion of the digital and post-digital and virtuality, listen to the selected clips from the Echo recording. But in these two videos, for you guys now, I'm going to concentrate on what I just described. So first of all, the platform convergence era definitions, and then in the second video, the issue of portable screens. Okay, so part one, convergence, media in transition, or video one. Today, media forms such as film, television, and newspapers that people perhaps previously viewed as separate silos, that's the term often bandied about, are increasingly seen as interconnected and interrelated as a result of what we call convergence. So rather than media forms as separate silos, distinctions that are fast breaking down in favour of media texts have various platforms. This week is about the platform and convergence era and how we increasingly experience media through portable screens. How many of you watch films on your mobile phones or other small portable device? That's an interesting question to ponder, because certainly that's a pretty recent phenomenon. And even if not the film or TV show itself, how many of you, for example, Google or social media or text or something when watching a film or a show on the same or another screen? So it's interesting to think about the way our viewing habits have changed in only the last few years, really, when it comes to our use of screens and our use of multiple screens, including screens within screens. So convergence is a result of the increased merging of information and communications technologies and media content. Or put even more broadly, in many ways, the merging between what used to be called the media industries or the communication industries and the IT sector. The most obvious example, perhaps, is how important digital technology and online technology, which are not exactly the same thing, but are certainly interconnected in many ways, and the internet have become to present-day experiences of television. Through its back history, though its back history predates the digital revolution, as can be seen, for example, in the complex relationship between film and television when the latter originally emerged. So, already in the 1950s, there's a kind of complication between image forms and the first gestures, I guess, towards convergence. Convergence is a direct consequence of the digitization of media production and delivery, first through the shift to digital image capture, so digital video and hard drive recording on the one hand, and physical media, so distribution on the other, so DVDs initially, and now finally online. So as I'll sort of talk about a little bit more, convergence does have a long history, or a long prehistory, but most theorists suggest that it really comes into its own, if you like, with the advent of digital technology. And as I said earlier, for more discussion of what we mean by digital, have a look at the relevant clip from the Echo lecture. So media convergence has transformed established industries, services and labour practices, so work in other words, resulting in new production, distribution and consumption techniques. Look at how TV was made, delivered and watched only 20 years ago, or in many ways only 10 years ago, versus the subsequent shift in power from what's often seen as Southern California's traditional power base, so the film and TV studios that we often call Hollywood, and then the move in more recent years to what's often called Silicon Valley or Northern California, and the incredible success of streaming technologies and services like Netflix. So convergence erodes industry and content silos, increasingly decoupling content from particular devices like a TV set. So to watch television, until relatively recently, you had to own or access a television set. These days, all you need is access to some kind of screen, and of course, the internet or some sort of, perhaps physical media at the very least. This has played havoc with public policy and regulation, as can be seen in the ongoing battle and legal grey area over VPNs, for example, and watching streaming services from offshore, etc. So you know how some people try to access, for example, US Netflix through getting a VPN, which is basically a bit of software or an app on your device that tricks the provider, in this case Netflix US, into thinking that you're in the US. There's a real grey area over this when it comes to the law. And so it's interesting the way in which convergence is actually putting a lot of stress on a whole lot of institutional and legal frameworks. So that's why I think we can summarise 6 major elements or fields relating to media convergence and its change drivers that are all very much kind of in conversation with each other. So there's technology, as I've described, the advent particularly of digital technology. There's industry itself, how the industrial structures are changing. As I said, in the case of TV, it's very much an assault by Silicon Valley, as it's often called, on the traditional owners or powerhouse of audiovisual culture in Southern California in the United States. Economics, of course, closely connected to all of this. How do you make money is the question in the online era. And the traditional TV and film studios were very slow to sort of realize this. They did well with DVDs for quite a while, but when it came to the notion of streaming, they were very slow to kind of work out a good business model for that, and really, in a sense, missed the game and allowed something like Netflix to kind of come in and to some extent take over. We've got a social dimension as well, changing social mores, and so convergence tends to allow more what we sometimes call a kind of niche production, cultural production. So you'll notice that not all Netflix programs, for example, or even films these days will necessarily seek the broadest possible audience, and so there's some quite kind of commercial TV shows or movies that really try and nonetheless deal with some slightly provocative or kind of socially controversial topics. Then there's the way in which convergence affects texts, and Rebecca will talk about this more next week. The whole question of what is a text, what is a TV show, what is a film, are fundamentally need to be fundamentally rethought in light of convergence. Where is the text is an interesting question. And then politics, as I've mentioned, the very slow response by the political regime or governmental agencies of the day to this brave new world of convergence media and its primary online mechanisms. So in your first reading for this week from Chris Barker, there's some really useful definitional stuff around convergence. He writes, convergence has been enabled by digital technology that enables more information to travel down any given conduit at greater speed over larger distances. So part of it is really a technical issue that's sort of gradually been solved, been quite gradual, how to get high quality or relatively high quality sound and vision through the internet to our screens, wherever we are. The impact of new technologies, he continues, in general, and digital processes in particular, can be summed up in terms of speed, volume, and distance. That is more information at greater speed over larger distances. So it is interesting how reliant convergence is, and in many ways, convergence almost itself is defined by these technical challenges, which is really like, again, the movement of the media world into the IT world when it comes to technical specifications and requirements. He also writes, convergence also refers to the consequences of the restructuring of the communications industries so that the corporate activities and corporations that had been distinct, so for example, a TV network versus Apple, an IT company, have come together in order to accrue for themselves the benefits that flow from synergy. So just to use that example again, Apple has become not only a huge IT company, but also a huge media company in many ways, partly through becoming a majority shareholder in some media companies, but also, of course, being a key provider of not only the hardware on which we increasingly watch shows and movies and listen to music, things like laptops and iPads, etc., but also, of course, the iTunes mechanism itself, the delivery or distribution technology. This involves bringing together the various elements of the communications industries at the levels of production and distribution so that they complement each other to produce lower costs and higher profits. So, Barker is reminding us there that convergence is in many ways driven by capital, of course, by the need to make money more effectively, more efficiently, and more cheaply. But there's nonetheless a kind of a tension here because, of course, the biggest threat of the digital world, particularly the online world, is the ability of audiences to copy and watch things for free. And so the big challenge for if you like, the old media companies is how to still make money. So there's definitely a tension. There's a kind of a push-pull factor here between audiences and the corporate sector. And that's where Netflix has found a really, and other, similar, albeit, less famous streaming services have found a really useful opportunity, obviously. They've kind of come in the middle there and really seduced audiences and in the end, reluctantly perhaps, the old media companies as well. So with the last 10 years' incredible rise of Netflix and other streaming services, distribution and consumer convenience are now the main game when it comes to this convergence. The increasingly dominant platform being no longer live or even cable TV, or even catch-up services such as ABC iView, although a lot of people still use those. But increasingly the main game is this notion of on-demand TV or movies, So it's up to us, the consumer, when we watch something, but also what we watch. So we're not just, if you like, victims of what a network chooses to show or to buy the rights to. Now we are, of course, still beholden to the rights situation of Netflix, but that appears to be, at least for many people, depending a bit on your tastes, a very large, choice, with, of course, a real dominance for English language and American shows and movies, although that's starting to perhaps shift a little bit. Netflix has made so much money, this once distribution service has now become itself a production powerhouse. So Netflix originally was a DVD distribution sort of rental service, and then of course it became a streaming service. But until only a few years ago, it was only a distribution service. It made no shows of its own until things like Orange is the New Black and House of Cards and some of these really big successful Netflix original series. That's mainly what they did. Now, of course, if you log on to Netflix, everything that's advertised to you are these Netflix original series and even movies. So the transfer of power from Southern to Northern California seems complete in the sense that Netflix/Silicon Valley is now not only stolen the kind of distribution metal, but it's also increasingly taking us, or should I say, competing with the old media companies for production itself. In other words, making the media that we watch. It's interesting even that in 2004, Barker could write, in recent years, the processes of convergence, which include diversification by financial, computer and data processing companies into telecommunications, have created multimedia giants that dominate sectors of the market. But whereas he writes, News Corporation's global television interests have a reach of some 2/3 of the planet, close quote. Today, we'd have to say Netflix's power grows by the day. So I'm sure Rupert Murdoch and Fox are regretting very much that although they had, of course, their, in some ways, successful pay TV or cable TV channel, Fox, increasingly that model is losing out, you'd have to say, to the Netflix model. So in the next video, taking all of that on board, I'll explore the screen dimension part of this story, which is certainly for all of us, media consumers and producers, a very important one. Thanks. I'll see you in the next video.